So, right now, at the time of filming, it is the 15th of October here in Melbourne, which means we're not only halfway through October, but also halfway through ADHD Awareness Month. What you're about to see, once I stop talking, is a video that I intended to release at the start of said Awareness Month. I'd been preparing and planning it a fair while beforehand. But once I filmed it, it ended up being a lot longer than I intended. I mean, I knew it would be long, but it was like 30% longer than I had even guessed. So the editing process took a lot longer, and I was also using a program I hadn't used before, so it was very much a learning process. I am now a lot better at editing, but it still took a lot longer. And after several failed sort of renders, finished products, I eventually decided that it would be best to cut the video into two parts. So what you're about to see right now is the first part, and I will link the second part in the description. The video itself, the original long form video, was sort of split into 6 and a bit sections. So I've worked it out that part 1, what you're watching now, is going to be sections 1, 2, and 3, and then part 2 will be 4, 5, and 6. Don't know why I needed to explain that to you. You probably would have worked that out, but just so you know. A bit like Star Wars. Not really. No. Is it? It might actually be a bit like... No, it's not. I'm not like Star Wars. Get that out of your head. Okay. I'm going to shut up now. Okay.
Hi. You probably don't know me. And if you do know me, you probably don't know me as well as you think you know me. Know what I mean? No, me neither. A few months ago, I was diagnosed with ADHD, as well as some mild autism. I'm not here to talk about the exact process involved in my diagnosis. I'm also not really going to go into how ADHD affects my day-to-day life. I'd like to share my own more personal experience of how ADHD has affected my relationships with people. I've had social difficulties all my life, and they were just some of the many things that could be explained by my ADHD. So I wanted to tell all my friends and say, look, guys, this is why I'm so distant and awkward. I'm not hard to connect with, I just have ADHD. So now we can be like proper friends. And I realized that proper friends is kind of a dubious term, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a sec. If any of my friends are watching this, they know that I didn't end up saying any of that. In fact, this is probably the first they're ever hearing about it. Knowing I had ADHD obviously did not mean that any of my problems just disappeared. A diagnosis is an explanation, not a solution. So, I decided to make a video. I had this YouTube channel that I hadn't really used, partly because of the ADHD, so it only felt fitting that I use it to do something about my ADHD. But again, that was months ago. Every time I tried to film, I couldn't quite find the words. I kept saying things like, proper friends. I'm still coming to that. Then I discovered that there is an ADHD Awareness Month every October, so I set myself a deadline, which, now that I think about it, was a very non-ADHD thing to do. But somehow I managed it. It's October, and I think I know what to say. Quick disclaimer before I do. A large amount of the story I'm about to tell has a somewhat dark and depressing tone to it that some might find troubling, and I don't want anyone to come away from this with a negative view of ADHD. This is my personal experience. Everyone's ADHD is different, but also, spoiler alert, I do end on a positive note.
Alright, so very quick disclaimer for the quick disclaimer. At this point, past me was about to say that you should bear with them until the end because it's worth it. And while that is true, obviously now that the video is cut into two parts, rather than bearing with them to the end, I would reword that as please don't judge part one, this part, until you've watched part two. Okay, so yeah, most of the dark, depressing stuff happens in part one, and then in part two, I make sense of it all. Hopefully, you have the patience to go to the next part after you finish this part. Okay, bye.
Of course, if you do find something I talk about makes you uncomfortable or upset, please stop watching. Your well-being comes first every time. I've put trigger warnings in the description, but if I've missed something, please let me know. Okay? Okay. My story.
Many people with ADHD will probably tell you that they struggled making friends as a kid. And for me, this is half true. It didn't take long for me to realize that I just naturally didn't fit in. So, early on, I started trying to hide this fact. It wasn't so much about me trying to be someone I'm not. I learned to pick my moments, choose when to let myself out and when to blend in, to disappear. I definitely had more practice with the latter. In fact, I suspect that some of my friends today can probably remember times when I have almost literally disappeared on them. It has become something of a skill that I turn to when I'm socially exhausted. Of course, as a child, I wasn't fully aware of what I was doing, just sort of following my instincts. The result being that I eventually was absorbed into several social circles. Balancing the extremes of being myself and being no one led to a public reputation of being a bit weird, but mostly harmless. Which was enough for most people's acceptance. Of course, there were always some who fixated more on my being weird, and you can probably imagine how that panned out. So I won't go into that. I've actually had a lot of friends growing up. So many that there was no real consistency in the type of friends that I had. I just sort of slotted in wherever I could, which was fine, but there were very few proper friends. My understanding of friendship, specifically close friends, best friends, was this idea of a special bond, the feeling of being cut from the same cloth, two sides of the same coin, all that sort of stuff. But I almost never felt that, even with friends that I'd known for ages. As much as I enjoyed our time together and felt some connection, I could never shake the feeling that I did not belong, that I was not even the same species. How could I possibly know what species I did belong to? I spent so much time trying to perfect my balancing act, I'd lost who I was to begin with, until it was no longer a case of belonging. I just thought I was broken, that I was just no good at friendship, and that would never change. So my close friends never really felt that close. Never felt like what I thought were proper friends. Now, I don't know about any of you guys, but when I was a kid, I was not at all capable of this level of introspection, let alone any levels of introspection. Instead, I was just very angry and frustrated. Not at anything or anyone in particular, just pure anger. All the time, for as long as I can remember. Because I was just out of sync with everything. School, friends, teachers, family, always on a different level, too far ahead, too far behind, coming from the weirdest angle. And I hadn't yet developed much in the way of humility or empathy either, so often I thought that it was everyone else that was wrong, not me. And you might be thinking that when I say angry, that I mean like throwing tantrums, the sort of screaming, crying, hitting stuff kind of tantrum. Yeah, not really. I was always an introvert, so all this anxious energy I had from feeling so out of place was just bottled up inside and slowly transformed into the pure anger I felt. Tantrums, as I understand them, are usually prolonged meltdowns, these sustained levels of that screaming, crying, whatever energy over a certain period of time. Um, but what I would probably call what I had uh, would be ruptures, I guess. Short bursts at like extreme levels, if that makes sense. You think of a child tantrum as annoying or uncomfortable, maybe. Some might even see them as cute, but I'm pretty sure that I full on scared people. And sometimes I definitely lashed out.
As a kid, I didn't really stop to address these feelings or how I acted on them. I was too busy living it, I suppose. But getting older, I became a bit more self-aware, more introspective. After all, part of being a teenager is working out who you are and who you want to be. But obviously my foundation wasn't all that stable. Or at least that's what teenage me surmised, whilst reflecting back on my childhood. Reflecting on the kid who was a bit weird, but mostly harmless. Reflecting on the kid who frequently drifted from one friendship circle to the next. The kid with an inconsistent personality who would lie about hobbies and interests just to fit in. The kid who, every so often, would attack their friends for innocuous reasons. The kid who once tried to strangle a friend for asking what the kid deemed to be a stupid question. The kid who punched another friend in the gut and immediately apologized as if it was an accident, because fitting in was all that mattered. The kid whose quest to fit in would ultimately be doomed by an unexplainable anger and resentment. Teenage me still felt that anger, but I was then able to acknowledge it, along with everything else I reflected on. Needless to say, the question of who I was and who I wanted to be very quickly became, what the fuck am I, and what the hell am I supposed to do about it? Questions that I would continue to ask myself for the decade leading up to my diagnosis. The only answer I could settle on was that I was dangerous, unstable, and not to be trusted. So I started deliberately distancing myself from my friends. Not that I didn't try to be social. Older habits of fitting in, I suppose. And maybe the tiniest hope of redemption. But generally, I had a bleak outlook. I fully expected that I would grow apart from absolutely everyone. Occasionally, there were people who sparked some hope. I was desperate to make it work with them, but the anger was always there in the back of my mind, and I'd always end up indulging myself, gorging myself, trying to get as much out of my time with those people before we would inevitably just fall away. In my short lifetime so far, I've attempted suicide twice. I haven't told many people that. Not in any meaningful way. After the second time, though, I did at least manage to tell people that I was taking a week off. Because of stress, I said. Which was a lie, of course. If those people are watching, I'm sorry. I lied. I have no excuse. Is that worse? Is lying about trying to kill yourself worse than not telling anyone? I like to think that if I had ever allowed anyone to really get close to me, they'd be able to call me out on my lie. They'd know that I don't really get stressed, that I actually like stressful situations, and that the only thing that really stresses me out is people. Of course, now I know that it's quite common for people with ADHD to feel at home in what other people would call stressful situations. Okay, so here's the thing. Parts of that story kind of make me sound like a angsty, self-loathing teen vampire. And that's partly because it's the story I told myself long before my diagnosis. I mean, it's all true, that all happened, but it's lacking certain nuances, which become much more obvious when you add ADHD to the mix.